I joked yesterday that with the Conservative Party celebrating the Kemi Badenoch win, speaking of smashing glass ceilings to do with a woman and a black person leading the Tory party, that this would soon be described as the new fascism by the left. And shortly after the Tory party's nosedive into leftist narrative, Labour MP Dawn Butler piped up. She states that Kemi's win represents white supremacy in blackface, that the win is also a victory for racism. And yes, this is the same Dawn Butler that released a poem for Black History Month describing how she's superior to the rest of us because she's got black skin.
You are the wrong one, the violent one, the weird one, whereas I am the chosen one, because I am of the first ones. You see this skin I'm in? This beautiful mahogany brown.
So when another one of these first ones gets made the leader of the Tory party, does it make Dawn Butler so upset? You would have thought she'd be happy. Well, it's the premise of this video that people like Dawn Butler, despite stating they hate racism and fight against fascism and so on, they actually crave what they term racism and fascism and the far right. Why? Because it reaffirms an ego identity, the idea that they are moral and good fighting an evil system. It doesn't matter whether it's represented in reality or not. What matters is the maintenance of their psychological condition. Incidentally, this is what turned me against modern leftism many years ago. You have to understand that it's simply rooted in the oppressor-oppressed dynamic despite all of its fancy language. Ergo, the aim is to always support the supposed oppressed who are dictated by leftist ideology. It doesn't really matter if that maps onto reality or not. And this is why, as less and less racism has become prominent in mainstream British society, demand has started to outstrip supply, so they have to manufacture it. This is where claims such as Tommy Robinson, a pro-multiculturalism Zionist, is a Nazi, come from. Again, none of it maps onto reality. In fact, it doesn't make any sense, but that's not the point for the progressive mind. The progressive mind wishes to reaffirm its own moral supremacy by trying to keep alive its own narrative of the oppressor and oppressed dynamic. Now, of course, it's natural to base some of your political beliefs on what you disagree with. That's essentially the Hegelian dialectic, the idea of a thesis, an antithesis, and a synthesis. That process goes on as we learn and develop more. However, this is where there's a major trap with modern leftism. It's not all leftists, but it's certainly the woke ones. They identify so strongly with a certain antithesis, it gives them a sort of narcissistic ego boost as some anti-racist freedom fighter. Now, because they've superglued themselves in the antithesis to the idea that Western culture is racist and white supremacist, they can never really move on and things can never truly develop. The whole of their political ideology has to centre around that while it stunts everything else. And this is why, much to the annoyance of people like me, they describe everything outside of their political ideology as hate. Yet, as I've said many times on this channel, I don't hate anybody. I wish peace and goodwill to all men and all groups. However, I don't believe that enforced mass immigration and multiculturalism is the right path to take. It's political manipulation to say that that's a hateful view. It's tyrannical even because it's undemocratic and it's been forced on the people. Further, I'd say my own political views are not rooted in hate. They're actually rooted in love. That is, based in the tradition that I follow, a transcendent Godhead, historical connection with my ancestors, and a vision for the future. Now just think, do any of our leading politicians or political commentators have any sort of view like that? It seems to me that they don't at all. They either base their worldview in the dictates of globalist liberalism or in the counter to something that they apparently don't like. Now, we've explored that in the case of Dawn Butler, but Keir Starmer's doing this a lot recently as well. Everything that seems to happen he blames on the Tories. Now, obviously, the Tories made a complete mess. We all understand that. But when all you ever do is blame your predecessor, it seems like you don't have any ideas or vision of your own. And that's because Keir Starmer doesn't have a vision of his own. He's a typical left-wing career politician who can only define himself in the form of the anti. You see this with other prominent leftists, such as everyone's favourite liberal Owen Jones. He describes himself on his Twitter page as an anti-fascist. What exactly does he mean by that? There's not exactly much fascism around these days. This can only be understood when we add in the oppressor-oppressed dynamic which is common amongst the radical left. Owen Jones knows fascism isn't everywhere, but he's simply positioning himself, narcissistically I may add, as a freedom fighter in an evil world, so everybody who disagrees with him is automatically bad. Yet let's do a little thought experiment here. What would happen if all of us said, do you know what, Owen? Your worldview is completely correct. Islam is a religion of peace. We are all white supremacists and toxic males. Let's do absolutely everything to bring forward the liberal socialist revolution. Do you think people like Owen Jones would be happy in that utopia? If all of us just joined one great conga line at a pride march, all the different religions holding hands and drinking pina coladas? I would wager that people like Owen Jones would not be happy. In fact, I think they'd be very, very depressed. Why? Because we've deprived them of an enemy, something which allows them to define themselves as a superior moral agent. This points to a great blind spot in the modern world where we believe we're past religion and its silly fairy stories of good and evil, yet we forget that man is a moral animal above all, and if he doesn't have a transcendent moral system to explain the world to himself, he will recreate it through political ideology. This is what modern wokeism/progressivism is. It's a pseudo-religion, and if you're not on board with it, you're not one of the angelic good ones, the Puritans. You are actively evil and you must be fought. Progressivism is a pseudo-religion because it can only define itself in the anti, i.e. it's not transcendent, it doesn't show man how to deal with freedom and himself. As the great Russian author Dostoevsky once said, nothing has ever been more insupportable for a man and a human society than freedom. Man is tormented by no greater anxiety than to find someone quickly to whom he can hand over that gift of freedom with which the ill-fated creature is born. Now, this is why I'm always banging on about tradition on this channel. The genius of our ancestors is they gave us a system that moderated the personal, political, moral and spiritual dimensions of life. They gave us the ability to bear the weight and responsibility of freedom. Yet because we've moved away from this great tradition, we've seen the progressive materialist and very limited ideologies come in, such as the oppressor-oppressed dynamic. This eventually will stunt the whole society, the whole civilization, and see the world burn. This is why, while we see things crumbling around us in the modern world, I don't believe we should fear at all. It's an opportunity for us to realize our roots, wake up to our historic tradition. That can guide us through to a new tomorrow. These are just my thoughts, however. Do let me know what you think down below, and do consider subscribing to the channel.